You'll never make it sitting behind a screen. That's what my father told me the last time we spoke, before everything changed. Just 3 years later, I pulled into his backyard barbecue behind the wheel of a bright red Ferrari, on the very day he gathered the entire family and all his longtime clients to showcase his success. And when I stepped out of that car, nothing could have prepared them or him for what I was about to reveal. My name is Joshua Langford. I'm 23 years old, and I built a financial technology company from scratch that landed a $14 million deal with one of Wall Street's biggest hedge funds. But before that deal, before the car, before the headlines, there was just a kid hunched over a second-hand laptop in a Charleston apartment, trying to prove to a father who measured a man's worth in sunburns and blisters that success could look different. This story isn't about money. It's about legacy. It's about what happens when two generations collide, when one man's pride meets his son's vision, and how one moment, one choice, one arrival at the right time can change everything. Stick with me until the end, because that Ferrari wasn't just a car. It was a message, one that rewrote the story between a father and a son in the most unexpected way. And it all began in a place where success meant showing up at sunrise with dirt under your nails, and where I was the boy who chose a different road. But every road has a beginning, and mine started the day I realized my dreams didn't fit in my father's world. What came next? That's where things got complicated. Where I come from, men don't talk about feelings. They talk about engines, property lines, and how many hours they worked last week. My father, Nathan Langford, built his landscaping company the same way he built our reputation in Charleston, with his hands, his back, and an old pickup that coughed every time it started, but never quit. To him, success was visible: rows of trimmed hedges, trucks lined up before dawn, sweat-drenched shirts on summer afternoons. Anything that didn't leave you sore by nightfall didn't count. When I was 12, he handed me a pair of gloves and said, "Time to earn your keep." From that day on, I spent every summer behind a mower or shovel, loading mulch, hauling stones, planting in heat that could melt asphalt. It was miserable work, but he believed it built a character. I believed it built resentment. I never said it out loud, but I hated the unspoken rule that sons had to become versions of their fathers. I wasn't lazy. I just saw things differently. While my dad measured time in labor, I was fascinated by systems, how processes worked, how numbers told stories. I used to spend hours in the library reading business magazines instead of sports pages. I remember the first time I brought home a school report about a mock investment project. I'd turned $10,000 of imaginary capital into $28,000 in 6 weeks. I handed it to him, beaming. He barely glanced at the paper. "You want to impress me? Learn how to change the oil in that mower out back." My mother, Denise, was softer. A public school teacher for nearly 30 years, she always had a quiet word of encouragement, waiting in her pocket. She understood what I was trying to do, even if she didn't fully understand how I was doing it. When I got into the University of South Carolina's business program, she baked a cake and lit a single candle. Dad handed me a $20 bill and said, "College boys think they know everything until they meet the real world." That was his version of support. I packed up and left Charleston with a duffel bag, a second-hand laptop, and a silent promise that I wouldn't come back until I had something to show for myself. In my first year, I kept my head down. I wasn't the loudest in the room, but I was usually the last one to leave the library. Sophomore year, everything changed. During an economics course on financial modeling, I became obsessed with the idea of predictive markets, how algorithms could map human behavior and forecast investment shifts more accurately than traditional firms. I started sketching out a concept during late nights in the dorm lounge, a self-learning algorithm that adjusted in real time based on market sentiment, historical patterns, and live economic indicators. It wasn't long before one of my professors noticed what I was doing. After a presentation I gave in class, he pulled me aside and said, "What you're building could change how regular people invest. This isn't a class project anymore." That was the moment, the pivot point. I went back to my dorm, sat on my bed, and stared at the ceiling. I was 20 years old, broke, and staring down a choice most people twice my age wouldn't dare make stay in school or bet everything on the code I believed in. I called home. Mom cried when I told her I was dropping out. Dad didn't say a word, he just hung up. That silence was worse than shouting. It was a disowning in slow motion. I moved into a cheap apartment with 2 roommates and worked 10 to 12 hours a day on the algorithm. I coded until my eyes blurred. I skipped meals, forgot birthdays, and stopped calling home. It wasn't that I didn't care. I just couldn't take the disappointment anymore. Every time I tried to explain what I was doing, it was like speaking a different language. My father thought I was wasting time playing on a computer. To him, I'd traded a future for a fantasy. There were moments when I questioned everything, when the algorithm hit roadblocks, when potential investors passed without even finishing their coffee. One venture capitalist told me, "You're young, inexperienced, and solving a problem no one asked you to solve." I printed that email out and taped it to my wall. Not for motivation, but to remember who doubted me. By the time I turned 22, I had over 80 rejection letters taped across my tiny bedroom. And still, I didn't quit. Because underneath the anger, the loneliness, and the hunger, both literal and figurative, was something I couldn't let go of: the need to be seen. Not just as successful, but as right. I wasn't trying to destroy my father's version of the world. I was trying to prove there could be another one where brains and vision mattered just as much as brawn, and hours clocked. My friend Thomas, my old freshman roommate, was the only one who stuck with me through it all. He brought groceries when I couldn't afford them, listened to my investor pitches when no one else would, and always ended our conversations with, "You're the smartest guy I know. Just don't forget about us when you hit it big." He said it like a joke. I took it like a promise. What I didn't know at the time was that the moment that would validate every hour I'd ever worked was closer than I thought, and that it would come not with a handshake or a headline, but with an email that would leave me standing, speechless, in my kitchen coffee, growing cold in my hand. It was a Tuesday morning when everything changed. I woke up late, after another night of debugging the algorithm, bleary-eyed and half out of it, and shuffled into the kitchen for coffee. I opened my laptop out of habit, while the kettle boiled, expecting nothing new, just the usual rejection emails or silence. But there it was, an email from Patricia Donovan, CEO of Blackwater Capital. Subject line: proposal for exclusive licensing. I froze. I must have read that email 17 times before I believed it was real. 14 million, that was the number. $14 million for a full licensing deal and first look rights to any future applications of my algorithm. It wasn't just the money, it was the validation. Blackwater wasn't some backroom firm. It was one of the largest hedge funds on the East Coast. They didn't hand out money like candy. They did their homework, ran their numbers, tore you apart before putting a dollar down. And they'd chosen me. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stood there with the coffee cooling in my hand and silence ringing in my ears. The first person I called was Thomas. When he picked up and I told him, he let out a yell so loud I had to pull the phone away. "You did it, man. You did it." I could hear him running around his apartment, probably knocking things over in celebration. I was smiling, but part of me still hadn't caught up. Then I called my mom. She cried again, but this time it was different. These were tears of release, of pride, of something long buried being allowed to surface. She didn't say much, just "I knew you would," over and over. I didn't call my dad. I didn't know how. 3 days later, I was in New York, sitting across from a dozen Suettes and one woman with more presence than anyone else in the room. Patricia Donovan shook my hand, looked me dead in the eye, and said, "We don't just want the algorithm. We want you." That dinner high-rise views menus with no prices, waiters who knew your drink before you said it felt like a movie. But even surrounded by power and luxury, all I could think of was my father's voice in the back of my head. "Pathetic boy, you never had a head for success." That night in the hotel, I couldn't sleep. I opened my laptop and saw at my face on the Wall Street Journal's homepage. Our 23-year-old dropout lands, 8-figure deal with Wall Street giant. My name, my company, my story. I'd made it. Not in theory, not in dreams, in reality. And for the first time in years, I felt something close to peace. But also clarity. If you're watching this and you've ever had someone doubt you, if you've ever been told you're chasing something impossible, drop a comment below. I want to hear about the moment you proved them wrong, or the moment you're still working toward. And hit that like button if you've ever felt underestimated. That morning, I walked into a Ferrari dealership, still wearing a hoodie and jeans. The salesman didn't even glance up until I said the words, "I'm shopping," in the 200K range. 2 hours later, I was driving out in a red Ferrari Roma. Not because I had anything to prove, but because I needed a message, one that couldn't be ignored, a message for one person in particular. I didn't tell anyone I was coming back to Charleston, but I knew when to arrive. My father's Memorial Day barbecue was an institution. Clients, employees, distant cousins, they all showed up for the food, the music, the bragging rights. That year I timed it to the minute. At 2:00 p.m., I turned into the driveway. The roar of the engine did most of the talking. People turned. Conversations stopped. My father was at the grill mid-flip. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. I stepped out, car keys in hand, dressed in nothing fancy, just confidence. "Sorry I'm late," I said loud enough for everyone to hear. Traffic from New York was rough. He recovered quickly, slipping on the polite host face he used for clients. "Well, look who decided to grace us with his presence." A slap on the shoulder. "Whose car did you borrow to make that entrance?" Laughter rippled through the crowd. "I didn't borrow it," I said. "I bought it yesterday." More laughter, less certain this time. That's when I reached into my pocket, pulled out the title, and handed it to him. He unfolded it, read the name, and I watched something flicker behind his eyes. It lasted barely a second, but it was there. Recognition. Then he folded the paper and handed it back. "Must be nice to have rich friends who trust you with their toys," he said, turning back to the grill. "Grab a plate. Your mom made potato salad." I tried to speak with him that afternoon. Not about the car, but about what I'd built, about what it meant. Every time he changed the subject. When I mentioned Blackwater, he asked about landscaping contracts. When someone brought up the article in the journal, he waved it off. Don't believe everything you read. Journalists love to exaggerate. By the end of the day, I stood in his office while he filed paperwork, like always. "Dad," I said, "we need to talk about what's happening with my company." He didn't look up. "There's nothing to talk about. You got lucky with some computer thing. Don't think this makes you special." I didn't flinch. $14 million isn't luck. He finally looked at me. His face was tight. "You know what built this family, 40 years of hard work. Not buttons, not algorithms. That truck in the photo, that's what real work looks like." I stared at it, then back at him. "What I built is real, too," I said, "even if it doesn't leave dirt under your fingernails." His next words, Hit harder than any rejection ever could. Flash in the pan, he said. That's all this is. And when you come crashing back down, don't expect me to pick up the pieces. I didn't answer. I just walked out. But deep down, something had shifted. I wasn't hurt anymore. I wasn't angry. I was clear. And what I did next didn't just change my future. It forced my father to face his. The morning after the barbecue, I got a call from my cousin, Evan. His voice was low, hesitant. "Uncle Nathan's telling people your deal fell through," he said. "He said the Ferrari was rented, that you made the whole thing up." I didn't say anything at first, just stood there in the hotel room staring out at the Charleston skyline. I wasn't surprised. I should have been angry, but I wasn't. I just felt something settle into place. Certainty. My father wasn't trying to protect his pride anymore. He was trying to rewrite the story to erase the version where I succeeded without him. I spent that week in Charleston, staying in a hotel downtown, instead of going back to the house. I had meetings lined up with lawyers, financial advisors, and the early team I was building. But in the background, rumors were spreading faster than I could keep up. Thomas texted me, "Your dad came by the apartment looking for you." Asked a bunch of questions about where the money's going. Then my aunt called. "Nathan told people at church that you're in some kind of legal trouble. He said those New York people are suing you." That one stung. Not because it was true, it wasn't, but because it showed how far he was willing to go to protect his version of reality. Even Patricia from Blackwater reached out. "We got a strange call this morning," she said. "Someone claiming to be your father, asking for details about our agreement. Don't worry, we didn't share anything. Just thought you should know." I drove to the house midweek, knowing he wouldn't be there. Mom let me in nervous in a way I hadn't seen before. She made coffee, her hands shaking slightly as she poured. "Mom?" I said, "What's going on with Dad?" She didn't look up at first, just sat down, wrapped her fingers around the mug. "He's worried about you," she said, finally. "That's all." I shook my head, worried enough to tell people I'm a liar to call my investors. She sighed, eyes heavy with exhaustion. "You have to understand your success. It challenges everything he's built his identity around." I stayed quiet, letting those words sit in the silence between us. "That's not my problem," I said. "No," she agreed quietly, "but he's making it your problem." She hesitated like she was debating how much to say. Then she added, "The business is struggling, has been for years. He never told you because of pride. But the big landscaping chains are undercutting his prices. He can't keep up." I leaned back in the chair, stunned. That hit harder than any rumor. I'd assumed his coldness came from bitterness. But now I saw the fear underneath it. Fear of losing the only thing he'd ever known how to do. If you've ever had to carry someone else's pride while building your own life, tell me in the comments. How do you balance loyalty with truth? I really want to hear your perspective. I promised Mom I'd handle it. Not just to fix the mess, but to try and fix him in whatever way I could. But as I drove back into the city, I realized this wasn't just about his reputation or my success. It was deeper. My father saw my world, the world of finance technology algorithms, as a threat. Not just to his business, but to his place in the world. A world where men like him were becoming obsolete. He didn't hate what I'd built. He feared it had no room for him. That night I called Uncle Frank, my dad's younger brother, and his business partner. We met at a bar just outside downtown, the kind of place with peanuts on the floor and college football playing on mute. After a few sips of beer, Frank leaned in and said, "He remortgaged the house 3 years ago, put everything into the business, new trucks, new equipment, trying to keep up." I stared at him. "Why are you telling me this now?" Frank looked tired. Because yesterday he asked me if I thought you'd be willing to invest some of that computer money into the business. That was the breaking point. My father didn't believe in what I'd done, didn't acknowledge my success, but wanted my money to save the thing he refused to let go of. So he believes it's real, I said slowly. He just can't admit it. Frank nodded. Exactly. He knows you've done something incredible. But if he admits that, he has to admit that he was wrong. I didn't speak for a long time. Just sat there listening to the sounds of the bar around me. Laughter from a corner booth, the clink of glasses, the dull rhythm of country music. My father, the man who once seemed larger than life, was now a man trapped by his past, slowly drowning under the weight of what he couldn't change. On the way back to the hotel, I drove past Langford Landscaping's office. The lights were on. I parked across the street and watched through the window. My father was at his desk, hunched over paperwork, jaw tight with focus. He looked smaller than I remembered, not physically, but in spirit. For the first time I saw him not as a barrier to overcome, but as a man on the edge. A man clinging to his legacy with both hands. While the world moved on without him, I knew then what I had to do. Not for revenge, not to prove him wrong, but to offer him something he could still be proud of. Something that didn't erase his world, but brought it into mine. That's when the plan started forming. I wasn't just going to save his business. I was going to integrate it into something bigger, something that could evolve, grow, and carry both our names into the future. The next morning I made the first call, not to my father, but to the people who could help me reshape the very world he was afraid of losing. The plan came together faster than I expected. That morning I called Patricia Donovan at Blackwater. I didn't need her money. I needed her network. I want information on landscaping companies in the Charleston area, I told her. Specifically which ones are struggling, which are expanding, and who's open to acquisition. She didn't ask questions. By noon I had a list of the 3 biggest players in the region, and the metrics behind their growth, fleet size, revenue, employee, retention, contracts serviced. Data had always been my currency. Now I was using it to map out not just a buyout, but a rescue mission. By 3:00 p.m., I had 2 meetings scheduled, one with Greenscape Enterprises, the largest landscaping company in the state, the other with Bayfield Grounds, a fast-growing regional upstart. Both had been circling Langford Landscaping for years, waiting for Nathan Langford to blink. He never did. I intended to blink for him. At 10 the next morning, I walked into Greenscape's office with a suit that still felt new, and a pitch that felt like fire. The CEO, Harold Jenkins, was an old-school operator with a sharp mind and a sharper handshake. We talked numbers, service routes, local market conditions. Then I laid it out. I want you to acquire Langford Landscaping Fleet Contracts employees. I'll get him to the table. But in return, I want 2 things. 1, you keep every employee. 2, you keep Nathan Langford on board, not as a courtesy, but with a 5-year employment contract and profit sharing. He's not being pushed out. He's being pulled in. Harold stared at me. Then he said, "We've had our eye on that company for a long time. Prime service area, loyal customer base. But Nathan won't take my calls." I leaned forward. "He'll take mine." By evening I had the offer in writing, $1.2 million, or double what the company was worth on paper. It wasn't just a buyout. It was a lifeline. That same day, I finalized the lease on a 15,000-square-foot warehouse in Charleston's old industrial district. High ceilings, exposed brick, and plenty of room to grow. I envisioned it as the headquarters of something more than just a startup. I was bringing the operation home, not just to Charleston, but to the very streets where I'd pushed a lawnmower at 13, soaked in sweat, dreaming of something else. Next, I called Evan. "How do you feel about being Chief Operating Officer?" I asked. There was silence on the line. Then a laugh. "Are you serious?" he said. "I've never run anything." "Neither had I told him. "But you believe in what we're building. That's what matters." I offered him a generous salary and 2% equity. He accepted before I even finished explaining the benefits. "If you were in my shoes, would you bring family into your company, even with no experience? Would you bet on loyalty over credentials? Tell me what you'd do. Drop a comment. I want to hear your thoughts." 3 days passed. I ignored every one of my father's calls. He left voicemails with rising irritation. "We need to talk. You're being disrespectful. Let's meet for dinner. 7 o'clock tomorrow." Instead of dinner, I walked into his office unannounced. He was reviewing a landscaping contract, glasses halfway down his nose. When he saw me, he didn't smile. So he said, not looking up, "You decided to grace me with your presence." I placed a folder on his desk. "This is more important than dinner." He opened it, read the first page. Then his face darkened. "An acquisition offer." His voice was tight. "You went behind my back." I didn't flinch. "No, Dad. I went ahead of you. The business is failing. You and I both know it. This keeps your legacy alive. You stay on your people, keep their jobs, and the company becomes part of something bigger." He stood up, fists clenched. "So that's your plan? Walk in with your Wall Street connections and take over what I built?" "No," I said calmly. "That's your fear talking. This isn't a takeover. It's a partnership. You can stay stuck in pride, or you can lead in a new way. The offer expires in 48 hours. He didn't speak. His eyes said everything hurt. Betrayal, disbelief. I reached into my jacket and pulled out a key, placed it on his desk. "This is for you. The Ferrari. It's yours now." His mouth tightened. "I don't want your charity." I shook my head. "It's not charity. It's an advance on what we're about to build together." I left without waiting for a reply. What would you have done in that moment? Could you give the very thing that symbolized your success to the person who doubted you most? Let me know what you'd do in the comments. The next morning, my phone buzzed. A text from my mother. "He drove the car this morning. Didn't say a word about it, but he drove it." That night, Harold Jenkins called me. He reached out. He said, "We've got a deal in principle. Looks like it's happening." As I sat in my hotel room looking out at the harbor, I felt something I hadn't in a long time: relief. Not triumph, not revenge, just the quiet sense that maybe this story wasn't ending. It was about to take a very different turn. 2 months later, I stood on a makeshift stage inside our newly renovated headquarters, a former textile warehouse we'd converted into a tech campus with exposed beams, open space, and energy humming in every corner. The launch of Horizon Analytics wasn't just a press event. It was a declaration. 200 people packed the room: employees, city officials, journalists, and family. My team had worked night and day to bring the space to life. Fresh paint still clung to the walls. Our logo hung behind me, crisp and modern. The podium felt foreign beneath my hands. I'd spent so many years building in the shadows that stepping into the spotlight was a different kind of work entirely. But this was bigger than me. I looked across the crowd and saw familiar faces: Thomas in the front row, Evan standing just off stage, beaming in his brand new suit. And at the very back, arms crossed, was my father. He hadn't said much in the weeks since the deal went through. We hadn't spoken beyond a few transactional texts, but he was here, and that mattered. Today I began. We officially launch Horizon Analytics, a financial technology company with one simple mission: to make smart investing accessible to everyone, not just hedge funds and institutions, but everyday Americans. A wave of applause followed, and I could see camera flashes pop across the room. We're proud to be doing it right here in Charleston. I added a city built on hard work, resilience, and reinvention. Then I paused. The next announcement wasn't just business, it was personal. We're also unveiling our first local partnership, I said, scanning the room until my eyes landed on my father. Horizon is investing $2 million in Greenscape Regional Holdings, the newly formed parent company of several landscaping businesses, including the former Langford Landscaping. There was a ripple in the crowd, murmurs, heads turning. My father's head snapped up. As part of this investment, I continued, we're launching a technology initiative to help traditional service businesses compete in the digital economy. And I'm proud to announce that Nathan Langford will be leading that initiative as Director of Traditional Industries. That was the moment. That was the turn. If you're watching and you've ever had to prove someone wrong by pulling them in instead of pushing them away, smash that like button. And tell me, what would you have done with that microphone? Would you have called them out or lifted them up? The applause that followed was louder than I expected. People stood. Some looked surprised. A few clapped slowly at first, then with more conviction. But my eyes were locked on my father. His expression was unreadable, neither pride nor anger, just stillness. For the first time in my life, he looked like he didn't know what to say. After the presentation, people mingled. Champagne glasses clinked. Local reporters gathered sound bites. My mother hugged me 3 times. Thomas was already working the room full marketing mode. Evan pulled me aside, his voice low with awe. "You pulled it off," he said. "I don't even know how." I smiled, tired but proud. I didn't do it alone. Eventually my father approached, slowly. No entourage, just him. Up close I could see the years on his face more clearly. The lines the sun damaged, the pride carved deep over decades. "You planned this all along," he said. It wasn't a question. "I planned to build something that mattered," I said. The rest just fell into place. He looked around the room at the employees, moving with purpose, at the glass doors with the Horizon logo, at the future he never imagined being a part of. Then he said something that caught me off guard. "Your name's not on the building." I shook my head. "Neither was yours, but everyone knew who built it." He held out his hand. I took it. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't surrender. It was something quieter, recognition. Not from a father to a son, but from one builder to another. If you've ever reached that moment with someone who never believed in you, where respect finally replaces resentment, tell me how it happened. Was it loud? Was it quiet like this one? After the crowd thinned and the lights dimmed, I found myself standing alone in the corner of the building, away from the noise. I thought about what had just happened, about the fact that the boy who once mowed lawns under his father's watch was now helping lead that same industry into a new era. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like evolution. And while the deal was signed, the space built, the partnerships launched, there was still one thing left to be said. Something only he could say, or maybe not say. That next step I knew would come not in a conference room or a headline, but in a way only a father like mine could offer. Quiet, stubborn, and unmistakably real. 6 months after the launch of Horizon Analytics, things moved faster than I ever anticipated. The partnership with Greenscape exceeded every projection. We didn't just preserve the legacy of Langford Landscaping, we scaled it. With our technology layered onto their field operations, they expanded into 3 new states in under 5 months. Clients noticed, competitors noticed, and most importantly, the people who used to push mowers under my father's direction were now holding tablets, tracking routes in real time, managing supply chains with apps we built from scratch. They weren't just working harder, they were working smarter. My father's title, Director of Traditional Industries, wasn't just for show. He took it seriously. Each week, he brought in people like him, plumbers, electricians, general contractors, men who'd spent decades in fields technology had mostly ignored. He sat across the table from my 20-something engineers and challenged them not with theory, but with practical questions that mattered to real people. Why should a guy with grease under his nails care about this dashboard, he once asked during a product meeting. It wasn't criticism, it was context. And it made our tools better, simpler, more honest. We didn't become close, at least not in the way some fathers and sons are. There were no fishing trips or long talks on the porch. But we had lunch every Friday. Same booth, same order. He never talked about the Ferrari again, never talked about the day he signed the company away. But he was showing up, and for him that said everything. Then came something I never expected. During one of those lunches, he slid a folded newspaper across the table. Charleston Business Journal, he said. I opened it. The headline read, "Local tech firm partners with traditional trades creates 150 jobs in South Carolina." My name was in the first paragraph. His was in the second. Below the article, he'd written a note in block letters, "Don't let this go to your head." But beneath that, in smaller script, were the words, "You built something good." That was his way. No speeches, no apologies. Just a passing of the torch in ink and silence. If your father or anyone in your life ever surprised you with quiet pride instead of loud praise, tell me how it happened. I want to hear those moments. They're the ones that matter most. Meanwhile, Mom had finally retired from teaching. She was traveling now, ticking off places from a list she'd been writing in secret for years. Italy, Greece, New Mexico, Oregon. She sent postcards. Called from unfamiliar area codes. Once she FaceTimed me from a tiny kitchen in Florence, where she and my father were taking a cooking class. "Can you believe this man just needed dough?" she said, laughing. He ducked out of the frame, but waved. Back at the office, our team had doubled. We'd recruited graduates from local colleges, offered internships that turned into careers, and built a pipeline of talent that didn't have to leave Charleston to find opportunity. Thomas had joined full-time as our marketing director, and Evan, despite his early jitters, was thriving as COO. He had a natural instinct for people and a sharp eye for numbers. I leaned on him more than I ever admitted. I also noticed something changing in myself. I no longer felt like I was proving anything. Not to my father. Not to the investors, not to the world. I had shifted from proving to building, from defending to leading, and that made everything feel different, fuller, more sustainable. One afternoon as I walked through our office, I stopped by the wall where we'd painted our company values. At the very bottom, in bold letters, was one my father had suggested during a meeting no one thought he was paying attention to. "Remember whose shoulders you stand on." It wasn't just a tribute. It was a truth. Nothing I'd built would have existed without the work ethic he beat into me during those brutal Carolina summers. And nothing we were building now could thrive without the people he'd once led and the dignity they brought to every task. If you've ever stood on someone else's shoulders, even when they didn't know they were lifting you, take a second to reflect. Maybe send them this story. Or at least tell them those words go further than you think. By fall, we were preparing to announce our next phase, an incubator program designed to help traditional service businesses modernize their operations using our platform. But this time, my father was the one driving it. He'd started meeting with community leaders, church groups, small-town mayors. He spoke with clarity, passion, and experience. When they asked him why he was doing it, he didn't say, "For my son." He said, "Because we were being left behind." And now, we're not. That night back at my apartment, I looked out across the Cooper River and thought about that first day. I left Charleston, a 20-year-old kid, with a backpack and a chip on his shoulder. I'd thought success was proving my father wrong, but real success, it turned out, was building something big enough to carry both of us forward. And there was still one more thing left to build. One more chapter that neither of us saw coming. The incubator program started as a concept on a whiteboard, something we scribbled down after a late-night strategy meeting. But it didn't stay abstract for long. Within 6 weeks, we'd converted an old manufacturing wing in the warehouse into a co-working space tailored specifically for traditional trades. Plumbers, roofers, HVAC technicians, electricians, landscapers, they now had access to tools we'd spent years developing. Financial dashboards, scheduling automation, client management software. But more than that, they had each other. They had a space where blue-collar expertise and digital thinking weren't at odds. They worked side by side, and for many of them it was the first time they'd ever felt included in the future. My father was the heart of that room. He walked the floor like it was a job site, clipboard in handwork boots on sleeves rolled. But instead of barking orders, he asked questions. He listened. He challenged assumptions. He'd interrupt developers mid-demo with, "Yeah, but have you ever actually watched a guy try to input job details while his gloves are still on and it's raining sideways?" Everyone laughed, but they rewrote the interface that same day. And something strange started to happen. My father, who once scoffed at the idea of algorithms and code, began bringing ideas to meetings. He'd pull a folded piece of paper from his back pocket and say, "I was thinking, what if you added a button here that lets guys flag a job as incomplete without going back to the main menu?" And more often than not, he was right. His experience wasn't theoretical, it was earned. And the team saw that. They respected it. One day, during a site visit with a group of local business owners, one of them, an older man with decades of grime under his fingernails, turned to my father and said, "Nathan, I never thought I'd live to see you working out of a tech hub." My father just shrugged. Neither did I. But I figured it's better to learn something new than get left behind. If you've ever watched someone you love evolve before your eyes, not because you forced them, but because you gave them the space to choose, tell me about it. Drop it in the comments. Those transformations are the most powerful ones. As we scaled, we brought in mentors, held weekend workshops, and even hosted a local job fair where over 200 applicants showed up, many of them from families who'd been out of work for months. We created not just jobs, but pathways. And through it all, I kept a close eye on my father. I didn't tell him how proud I was. I didn't have to. He knew, just like I knew he wasn't doing this to impress me. He was doing it because he saw something real in it. One Thursday afternoon, I walked into the incubator wing and found him sitting at a round table with 3 young apprentices, all barely out of high school. He wasn't talking. He was listening, letting them explain how they'd used our app to save a full hour on a 3-house maintenance loop. One of them said I didn't think tech was for people like us. My father leaned back, crossed his arms, and said, "Neither did I. But here we are." That night we had dinner at a small barbecue joint off Route 17, the kind of place we used to pass without stopping when I was a kid. We shared brisket and sweet tea, the TV above the bar playing an old baseball game neither of us watched. Then he said something I'll never forget. "You know," he said, not looking at me, "you didn't just build a company. You built a bridge between the world I come from and the world you live in." I didn't respond right away. There was nothing to say, just a feeling that settled deep in my chest, one I'd chased for years. I didn't need a headline or a handshake. That moment, that acknowledgement meant more than any Ferrari ever could. But something else was on my mind. Bigger than our story. Bigger than Charleston. What if this model could work elsewhere? What if the incubator wasn't just a local experiment, but a blueprint? The idea crept in quietly, but once it was there, I couldn't ignore it. I started mapping out the cities, industries, regions that had been overlooked by venture capital and tech investment for years. Places like Tulsa, Mobile, Dayton cities, filled with skilled workers whose industries had fallen behind, not because of laziness, but because no one had brought them forward. I brought it to Evan and Thomas in our next executive meeting. What if Horizon becomes more than a fintech platform, I said. What if it becomes a national network for bringing traditional labor into the digital economy? Evan leaned back in his chair, eyes lighting up. You mean turning tradespeople into tech-enabled entrepreneurs? I nodded. Exactly that. And for the first time, the company we had built no longer felt like a finish line. It felt like a beginning. One rooted in a single truth I'd taken years to understand. Legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's what you build that keeps going. The national expansion wasn't a decision, it was a realization. The data was already pointing the way. In cities like Birmingham, Toledo, and Shreveport, there were thousands of independent tradespeople still scheduling appointments with paper calendars, still quoting jobs with handwritten estimates, still doing payroll by memory. It wasn't because they were stubborn. It was because no one had ever built technology that respected the way they worked. What we had done in Charleston wasn't just scalable, it was needed. We started small. I flew to Tulsa on a rainy Monday in November with Evan and a pilot program proposal. We met with the local Chamber of Commerce, then with 2 trade unions, and finally with a coalition of small business owners who'd been struggling to stay afloat. The numbers spoke louder than we did. Businesses that joined our Charleston incubator saw on average a 34% increase in job efficiency, a 22% boost in revenue within 6 months, and most importantly, employee turnover dropped to nearly 0. Why? Because when people feel part of something modern and growing, they stop looking for the exit. We got the green light in Tulsa, then came Dayton, then Savannah. We didn't roll out flashy tech. We brought in people. My father, to everyone's surprise, joined us for 2 of the site visits. Not as a figurehead, but as a translator. He could take a digital pitch and turn it into a language that made sense in a break room full of guys in steel-toe boots. This ain't gonna replace what you do, he told a group of plumbers in Ohio. It's just gonna help you do it faster with less headache. If you've ever seen someone step into a new role later in life, after decades of being sure who they were, tell me about it in the comments. I want to hear how transformation showed up in your life or your family. That winter Horizon Analytics went from a startup to a movement. Our mission evolved. It wasn't just about making investing easier. It was about bridging 2 economies, the digital and the manual, the spreadsheet and the shovel. We partnered with local community colleges to create training pipelines. We launched a mobile version of our platform specifically designed for areas with limited internet access. And every time we entered a new city, the first conversation was never about money. It was about dignity. And somewhere in the middle of all that growth, something shifted between my father and me. Not just in title or task, but in tone. He started sending me notes after meetings, just a sentence or 2 handwritten. Good job on the Tulsa pitch. That HVAC guy had a great question, maybe loop him into beta testing. He wasn't mentoring me. He wasn't reporting to me. We were collaborating. There was one day that hit harder than I expected. We were in Baton Rouge for a launch event. At the end of my presentation, a woman in the crowd raised her hand and asked, "Where did this idea come from?" I looked toward my dad at the back of the room. He didn't flinch, just nodded once. I told the story. The long version, about the boy behind the mower, the silence at the barbecue, the day I dropped the Ferrari keys on a desk and walked away. When I finished, the room was quiet. Then someone clapped. Then the rest joined in. Afterward, as we walked to the parking lot, my father said, "You didn't have to tell them all that." I shrugged. They needed to know where it started. He looked at me for a long second. "Yeah," he said, finally. "Maybe I did too. If you've ever had a breakthrough moment with someone who mattered to you, someone you spent years not quite understanding, share it below." These stories connect more than you think. The real high point, though, came unexpectedly. It was late December, right before the holidays. We were back in Charleston, closing out the year. I walked into our office and found a group of our earliest hires guys who used to work for Langford Landscaping, huddled around a laptop. They were watching a news segment, national coverage. The headline at the bottom of the screen read, "Tech Firm Reimagines the American Trades One City at a Time." In the middle of the story, they cut to a clip of my father walking through a warehouse in Tulsa explaining the training process to new recruits. He wasn't trying to sound impressive. He was just being himself, clear, unpolished, honest. One of the guys in the office turned to me and said, "He's kind of famous now, huh?" I smiled. He's been famous in his own way for years. And just like that, I saw it clearly. This wasn't a story about me proving him wrong. It was about both of us finding a way forward together in a world neither of us could have navigated alone. That night I stayed late, looking out across the quiet city from my office window. The lights of the bridge in the distance, the soft hum of the buildings still alive behind me. We weren't just transforming businesses, we were redefining what success could mean when two generations stop resisting each other and start rebuilding the future side by side. And just when I thought the story had come full circle, an opportunity came across my desk that would test everything we'd built and everything we'd become. The email came on a gray Tuesday morning, sandwiched between a calendar invite and an invoice approval request. It was from the Department of Commerce. Subject line, Strategic Partnership Opportunity, National Workforce Modernization Initiative. At first I thought it was spam, but as I read through the attached briefing, my stomach tightened. This was real. The federal government was launching a public-private initiative aimed at reskilling America's trades workforce for the digital economy. They wanted partners who had already proven they could do it at scale. Horizon Analytics was at the top of the short list. The proposal was enormous, 12 states, over 500 municipalities, and a $120 million grant fund designed to match private sector investment in workforce tech training and infrastructure. They weren't looking for ideas. They were looking for systems that already worked. And that was us. At first, I felt nothing but pride. This was the kind of opportunity that would have once sent me into a frenzy of strategy decks and investor calls. But as I sat at my desk, rereading the email, I felt something else creep in hesitation. Not because we weren't ready, but because I wasn't sure what kind of leadership this next step would require. Scaling a mission was one thing. Becoming a national model. That came with visibility, politics, scrutiny, and risk. I brought the opportunity to our executive team later that afternoon. Evan's eyes lit up. This could change everything. Thomas Ever the realist asked, "Are we sure we're ready for this kind of attention? This isn't Charleston anymore." I nodded. That's exactly why we have to think this through. We spent the next 10 days in planning sessions, reviewing impact data, stress testing our infrastructure. Meanwhile, word of the opportunity leaked to a few regional partners. Suddenly, we were getting calls from state agencies, community colleges, and mayors. Everyone wanted to be included. And then my father called. "Got your email," he said simply. He never liked long introductions. "That government project. You going for it?" I paused. We're still evaluating it. There was a beat of silence. You want to know if it's worth it, he said. It is, but not for the reasons you think, he went on. You didn't build this company just to be rich or famous. You built it because you were tired of seeing people like me being left out. Now you've got a shot to fix that on a bigger scale. So either you do it, or you sit back while someone else does it wrong. That was all he said, and it was all I needed to hear. If you've ever been faced with a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity and had to decide between comfort and calling, what did you choose? Drop it in the comments. Let's talk about those crossroads. By week 3, we made the decision. Horizon would partner with the Department of Commerce. We'd roll out pilot programs in 3 states to start South Carolina, Ohio, and Oklahoma. Each site would feature a tech-enabled training center built into an existing trade school staffed by local mentors and supported by our analytics platform. We'd invest $6 million of our own capital to match the federal contribution. This wasn't charity, it was leadership, and this time, we weren't launching quietly. We held a press conference on the steps of the Charleston Civic Center. Cameras, reporters, trade workers standing beside engineers in matching polos. I stepped to the podium and looked into a sea of faces, some skeptical, some hopeful, all watching. We're not replacing traditional labor, I said. We're reimagining what it can look like in a modern economy. These are not workers to be rescued. These are builders to be equipped. The applause came slowly, then stronger. I spotted my dad at the back, arms folded, sunglasses on. He didn't clap, but he didn't leave. That week, media coverage exploded. Forbes, Bloomberg, CBS, Sunday Morning. They all wanted the story of the landscaper's son who was now helping shape a national workforce initiative. Headlines like, "From mower to model how Horizon Analytics is changing blue-collar America" made the rounds. But behind the scenes, the real work began. We deployed implementation teams to the 3 states, hired 60 new staff, launched the first phase of our mentor certification program. My schedule went from intense to punishing. I was waking up in a different city every 3 days. Some nights, I forgot where I was until I looked out the window. One night in a motel in Columbus, I found a voicemail from my mom. "Your father's been different lately," she said. "He watches your interviews, even the ones he says are boring. Sometimes he rewinds them. I played it twice." The next day, I flew back to Charleston for a quarterly review with our original team. As I walked through the old warehouse, now buzzing with new hires and interns, I passed the glass conference room where it all began. Inside sat a photo I hadn't seen in a while, my dad, age 20, next to his first landscaping truck. And next to it, a new photo, me standing at that same truck, handing him the keys to the Ferrari. That image told the whole story, not just of what we built, but how we got there. And it reminded me that every big idea starts with a moment that feels small, quiet, almost invisible. Just as I turned to leave, Evan rushed in, holding a thick envelope. "You need to see this," he said. Inside was a letter from the White House. The president wanted to meet, not for a photo op, but for a working session on building a future where American labor and American tech could finally stop working against each other. It wasn't just recognition, it was responsibility, and I knew that what came next would ask even more of me and more of us than anything before. The meeting was set for 10:30 a.m. in the Roosevelt Room. No cameras, no press, just senior officials, a handful of advisors, and me. I wore the same charcoal gray suit I'd worn at the Horizon Analytics launch, not because it was lucky, but because it reminded me where this journey started. My father called that morning. "Don't try to sound smart," he said. Just sound like yourself. That's what got you this far. I smiled. It was his version of a pep talk. Walking into the West Wing didn't feel real at first. I'd seen it in movies and textbooks, but being led through security and down polished halls by a staffer in a navy blazer turned it into something tangible. When I stepped into the room, the president was already seated surrounded by a table of people with folders, laptops, and expressions that said they were used to being the smartest ones in the room. But the president just looked up and said, "Josh, glad you're here. Let's talk." For the next 90 minutes we did. We talked about the trades, how 47% of America's essential workforce still used paper scheduling and word-of-mouth referrals, how 2 million skilled jobs were going unfilled because young people didn't know those jobs existed, and how digitizing the trades wasn't about automating people out of work. It was about making their work sustainable in a world that keeps moving faster. I told them about Charleston, about my father, about how we built a bridge, not a tower, about the men and women who showed up every day and deserved better tools, better training, and better recognition. One of the advisors asked, "What makes Horizon different from other tech firms trying to enter the labor market?" I didn't hesitate. We don't treat workers like users. We treat them like partners. We design with them, not for them. And we never assume we know better. We ask. The president nodded. "That's rare," he said. "And that's why this works. If you were given a chance to represent everything you believe in at the highest level, would you speak from data or from the heart? Let me know in the comments. I'm curious how you would lead." After the meeting, they asked if I'd be willing to help craft policy recommendations for the next wave of federal workforce investment. It wouldn't be flashy, no press tours, just real input on how to shape funding training programs and incentives that would ripple out to every corner of the country. I said yes before they finished the sentence. That evening, I flew back to Charleston. I didn't go home. I went straight to the office. It was quiet, the kind of silence that only exists when everyone else has gone home, but their energy still lingers. I walked past the incubator wing and saw the lights still on in one of the bays. Inside, two of our newest hires, a young woman who used to work construction and a former auto tech, were reviewing UI screens for a mobile app we were building for plumbing contractors. They didn't see me, and I didn't interrupt. I just stood there for a moment watching them shape the future we once only imagined. A few days later, we hosted a community roundtable at the Horizon HQ. We invited business owners, city leaders, high school counselors, and trade workers. No pitch deck, just a circle of chairs and real conversation. My father spoke near the end. He stood slowly, cleared his throat, and said, "I used to think success looked like trucks and sweat. Then I thought it looked like that red Ferrari. Turns out it looks like this room. People from every side of the street trying to build something that'll outlast them." The room went quiet. Not out of awkwardness, but respect. He didn't talk much at events. When he did, people listened. A week later, I received an envelope in the mail, no return address, just my name handwritten on the front. Inside was a photo of my father and me taken at the Horizon launch. We were both looking away from the camera, but in the same direction. On the back, in his handwriting, it said, "We're not the same, but we're not separate." That line stayed with me, because that's what we were trying to do, bridge the gap, not just between generations or industries or education levels, but between what America was and what it could still be if we stopped pretending that tradition and innovation couldn't sit at the same table. It was becoming clear that our story had struck a national chord, not because it was flashy or dramatic, but because it was real, and that reality came with responsibility to protect what we'd built, to scale it with integrity, and to make sure no one got left behind on the way up. The momentum was growing. So was the pressure. But I knew we were heading into something bigger than anything we'd faced before. And it would take everything we had to meet that moment with the same clarity and courage that got us this far. 6 years ago, I was just a kid, behind a screen, trying to convince the world and my father that I was building something real. Back then, success felt like a finish line, something I had to reach before I could finally breathe. But somewhere along the way, I stopped running toward validation and started walking with purpose. I learned that real success doesn't come in the form of cars or contracts. It shows up in quieter moments, like watching your father listen to a young tradeswoman explain an app he helped shape, or sitting in a policy room and realizing that the decisions you help make will impact families you'll never meet. I've made peace with the fact that my father and I may never see the world the same way, but we learned to respect what the other brings to the table. His pride wasn't arrogance, it was protection. And my ambition wasn't rebellion, it was hope. We just needed time to see each other clearly. Now every Friday we still grab lunch at the same place. He complains about the fries being too salty. I joke about his shirt being older than our interns, and somehow that's become our rhythm. My mother is happier than I've ever seen her, traveling, taking photos, reminding me to slow down. And our company, Horizon Analytics, has grown into something larger than I ever imagined. Not just a tech firm, but a movement rooted in dignity, opportunity, and trust. What started as a personal mission has become a shared legacy. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this: you don't have to choose between honoring where you came from and building where you're going. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is create a future that makes space for both. Thank you for staying with me through this journey. If this story moved you, inspired you, or reminded you of someone you love, leave a comment and share it with them. And if you want more stories that feel real, honest, and grounded in life the way we actually live, hit subscribe to this channel. Because what we're building here, it's not just content, it's connection. And I'd love for you to be part of it.